Okay, so this is our second round,
Welcome to Khalidiyya, the Khalidiyya podcast,
the Khalidiyya show, of all
episode
the
two.
happy things that are happening in the world, rainbows, and butterflies.
Unicorns.
Yeah. So today we decided to choose a pretty easy, soft, happy topic, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So there's a number of things that are happening right now that are in flux. There is a truce between Israel and Hamas, which is holding for the moment, and that's good for all the civilians that get the shit bombed out of them.
Well, it was holding, and then they broke it for a little while. Now it's back to holding.
Yeah, that's how they always do it. We'll shoot a few things back and forth every once in a while.
Ceasefire.
It's mostly holding.
Yeah.
So that is relatively stable. I think partly because there's a lot of other things being cooked in the Israeli government. Bibi Netanyahu was pushed into the opposition. He's now a minority in the Knesset and in the government.
So for those who don't know, Benjamin Netanyahu was Israel's longest serving prime minister, and so he just got booted out.
He was prime minister in the late 90s, like 96, 97, and then he came back. And he's been
a political animal. He's a political animal, but it was classic Netanyahu moves whenever corruption charges get
he's under
thrown
indictment
his way
currently.
There are a lot of corruption charges that have gotten thrown his way over the years, and so whenever that happens, usually you see a flare up in the violence, right? You see
he bombs Gaza,
and that's usually how he gets people to become distracted, become more super patriotic. It's like, oh, let's rally around the leader. And so that's exactly what happened this time.
I mean, I think Americans can understand this very well. It's not. It's not very different from the things that Bill Clinton did, and
George Bush,
Desert Fox, and George W. Bush. Yeah, but people forget Desert Fox in the 90s. It was right around the time Monica Lewinsky thing was happening.
Right,
and he started bombing Iraq again.
Yeah, I mean, it's one political suicide for politicians not to rally around the leader, and then two, it's just socially unacceptable to not really be on board.
It becomes about supporting the troops instead of about questioning the leader.
Right. So
a move that politicians like to pull, even though most of these politicians never have to really worry personally about the consequences of military action.
Right. So Netanyahu, that didn't work this time. He still got booted out, even after the Gaza campaign. And so they have a new prime minister, Naftali Bennett, who's more right wing than Netanyahu, who's said some pretty nasty racist things about.
I don't know if he's more right wing than Netanyahu.
Well, I mean, in the sense that his party is, from what I understand, his party is further to the right than Likud.
I mean, Israeli politics are really I can't claim to be an expert on them, but
they're fluid. They're fluid, and the coalitions that form, shape how different policies are come about totally. But he has a pretty radical racist past. He was the head of an organization that
most of them do.
represented settlers. Yeah, yeah, but like he's yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways,
But this is
so
a very strange coalition, because this is the first time that an Israeli governing coalition involves an Arab party.
is there an Islamist party in there too, or like is
They're
it?
called. I've heard it called Islamist. I'm not sure if they're really Islamist. I'm not sure exactly
Let's,
to what degree they're Islamist.
yeah, maybe they're
I,
just labeled as such.
I think it might be a little bit of a, you know, over labeling,
Right.
but
Go ahead.
I mean, historically, Israelis have been more, or during the 90s, 80s, and 90s at least, Israelis were more comfortable dealing with Islamists than they were dealing with secular nationalists or socialists.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Cold War,
Yeah.
like, so it made sense.
Although, the kibbutz movement was mostly socialist, and the kibbutz was the original, movement of Israeli settling in Palestine.
Well, if it's
So,
Western socialist, that's different, right?
oh.
That's like, okay, well, if you're white socialists coming from Western Europe,
If you're
then
coming
yeah,
from
you can,
Poland, it's
you
okay to be
guys,
a socialist.
or Eastern Europe,
Mm.
definitely. But yeah, you can go around frolicking around in like your kibbutzes and be all socialist and like hippie, like. But if you're
Kibbutzim.
like
Kibbutzim
kibbutzim,
is the
kibbutzim,
correct
but
plural.
but if you're like an Arab socialist, God forbid, like
Yeah, for sure.
that's just too radical.
That's a little bit too socialist.
That's
Like,
right.
socialist for you.
Yeah.
By the way, we to take a pause for a second and just say, criticism of the Israeli government and the Israeli military and Israeli government entities, it has nothing to do with animosity or hatred of Jewish people anywhere in the world, including in Israel. It has nothing to do with hating the Israeli people. And I think you just need to throw that out there, just for
that
anyone
needs to
who
be
might be
said, because
questioning that.
there are a lot of people
Like,
who, unfortunately, like Zionists tend to use that line, that propaganda, to make it seem as if anyone who's against Zionism is anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, which is not the case,
which is
obviously.
true, but also Zionism gets the term Zionism gets used weirdly by anti-Semites who don't really know what it means.
So let's give it
Okay,
give it a description.
real quick, Zionism is purely the political idea that Jews should have a state for Jews, and it came about in the late 19th century after the Dreyfus affair and some pogroms in Russia. And so the idea was, well, we're not welcome in Europe, we need a state of our own. And Europe was becoming very nationalist. Greece was becoming, this is where nationalism was blowing up. It was blowing up everywhere in the world. You had the Young Turks in the Ottoman Empire who were saying we should have a state just for Turks, even though, a huge amount of like North Africa and the Middle East was controlled from Turkey. They're like, we need a state just for Turks. And Czechs wanted their own state, and Albanians wanted their own state, and Greeks wanted their own state, and they had all been part of larger empires. So it was the era of nationalism, which still hasn't like quite worn off the funk of nationalism. But it was the idea that every ethnic, linguistic, and religious group should have its own country. rather
hmm
than like having a cosmopolitan type of a state
Which I
where,
mean, well, it was more like empires before, where you had
sure,
people of numerous ethnicities and who spoke different languages, practiced different cultures and religions, and
yeah,
there was no identifying official. I mean, you could have an official religion, let's say, but that's not to mean that, most cases that people of different backgrounds couldn't be part of that empire or that entity, if you will. So, like, I'm
sure,
thinking like the Ottoman Empire, for example, is a good case.
yeah,
Um, so now, then with the movement of like nationalism, you had like the siloing effect of, basically humans being siloed off into like
yeah, and breaking
different
up. It's like what
states.
happened to Yugoslavia after,
hmm
you know the fall of communism. It broke off into ethnic, little small ethnic countries that then went to war with each other. And you had the Bosnia War, and it was ugly. And I am not a fan of dividing everybody else based on, language and, some perceived ethnicity.
It's
Um,
totally artificial and goes against, like, I think, human nature to live, for human beings to live in that
I mean,
way.
it's a sort of tribalism that is opposed to the concept that most of us say we support, which is a concept of, a liberal democracy. And if we say we
Right.
believe in a liberal democracy, it doesn't matter, those things shouldn't matter.
But this is the kind of thing that led to the world being divided up into, like, the map of the world being divided up into states with borders. And so depending on where you were born, that dictates where you're allowed to travel, or if you're allowed to travel, or where, like, what
Sure.
your economic situation or social situation is like, in life. And so it's totally inhumane. It's a totally inhumane system.
Yeah,
Um,
and human migration is a natural thing. Is one of a
right.
very
People have
natural part of our
lived,
history. People migrate.
human beings have lived, like, by migrating and by intermixing through
Yeah,
cultures for thousands of years. And so,
and
for
most of
all of a
us,
sudden, like,
go take an ancestry.com, test and see what kind of mixtures you got in you, because most of us are not pure, anything.
right.
Um, but you know what I mean. On paper, this is what America is about.
Yeah.
You know what I
Like the
mean?
whole melting pot, like,
Yeah,
situation,
the legend of
or
America is that it doesn't matter. Like, send us your poor, your weary, your, you know ugly, your fatsos, the girl that everyone made fun of in school. Send them to America. We'll welcome them here.
yeah.
So, and the thing is, I think it's a great idea. I agree with America on paper in that sense, but it's never really worked that way. But it's something to aspire to, and
Right.
most political ideologies are something really more aspirational than they are, um, ever really achieved in reality. But you keep working at it,
Right.
and you fight the opponents of it who want to divide the world between class and race and religion.
So, since we were speaking of religion, we're talking about Zionism and
Hmm.
the idea of it being, a movement, a national movement for Jews to establish a state for themselves, in like the modern nation state sense. So yeah, that is what Zionism is. It's they, the idea that they have a land that they want to control, that there is a piece of land that they want to control, and anyone who isn't Jewish is not welcome there, two is not cannot be a citizen.
Yeah. I mean, now here, okay, well, see that can transition into the other major issue that's going on politically there. But I mean, real quick, there's kind of a conflation and confusion about, when we talk about Jewishness, because on the one hand, being Jewish is a religion. On the other hand, it is cast as an ethnicity. However, it has been, it is known that, there are many ethnicities. You have Black Jews, you have Russian Jews, Eastern European Jews. They are not all descendants of the people of Moses. If you want to, even, if you even believe the story of the people of Moses, they are not all descendants of those people directly, and they've mixed or they've converted. They were converts to Judaism
Well,
in Eastern
interestingly
Europe.
enough, you mentioned Black Jews. I mean, there is a pretty strong argument that Black Jews may be actually the descendants of Moses, since there are arguments that even Moses was Black, and
Well,
so.
I mean, now we're getting into Rastafarianism, and then there's also like the whole like Solomon and Sheba and the
Well, no, not even
that kind of stuff.
Rastafarianism. I mean, there are studies that show that ancient Egypt wasn't as the people of ancient Egypt weren't as light skinned. And so, I mean, that at some point there was some pharaoh, can't remember his name, but apparently expelled all the Black Egyptians to southern Egypt, to like Nubia and beyond. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the idea is that it shows, it just goes to show how race is such a
It's a
like
fluid thing.
a very fluid and weak concept that
Yeah.
didn't really mean much like back then.
No, it meant something to colonial Europeans to justify the fact that they were putting other people down. Because
Yeah.
you can't, and this is the thing about colonialism, is you can't, if you want to look at yourself as the good guy, you can't, and the civilized, we're the civilized people. You can't totally like oppress another nation of people, another entire group of people, or geographical region, without somehow justifying like why you are oppressing them and taking all of their wealth. So you have to make a justification. Like that's right about, colonialism was when racism was invented. It was like, well, we scientifically decided that you guys are inferior to us, so we get to do this to you. So you're not quite as human as we are, so it's not really quite as much of a sin as if we did it to like a French guy. And that's
Right.
basically, you know what I mean? Like if you boil it down, that's what I mean. That's an oversimplification of the history, but it's essentially what was going down.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there are some other elements to the racism, like to
sure,
the justification for they're still pretty bad. They're still racist justifications, but yeah, go on.
but I mean, you can boil it down like in terms of the impetus behind it, like the concept behind it. Like you have to look at Black people, and brown people and Asian people as not quite as human as you are, because otherwise you have to look at yourself and say, look at what I'm doing to these people, and this is horrifying.
Yeah.
So it's justification to do horrible things. in sense, we've wandered into the racial territory. The other major thing that's happening in Israel right now is there's a big debate about family reunification laws, because basically there was a law passed in 2003 that restricted the ability of an Israeli to marry someone from the Palestinian territories and bring them in as their spouse into Israel, and give them residency, and let them apply for residency and citizenship eventually. And it's being debated. Most of the governing coalition are opposed to ending the law that restricts family unification.
So just so everyone knows, it's very rare. I mean, it does happen when you see like an Israeli Jew marry a Palestinian Arab, right? But what I think we're focusing on here is the Palestinian minority in Israel. So these are these are Israeli citizens who are of Palestinian descent, right?
Yeah.
And so they may want to marry someone who is from the Palestinian territory. So who's not a citizen of Israel, lives in the West Bank, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
And they may know each other, their families may know each other, because they are, essentially one people.
They're the same people. Yeah.
They're the same people, they have family connections going back hundreds of years. So when they get married, sometimes, they'll, arrange a marriage somehow, set up a marriage between someone who lives in Israel and someone who lives in the West Bank. And generally they're of Palestinian origin. And so the Israeli law is to restrict the ability of them to unite in Israel and live together and have residency in Israel.
And Israeli citizenship, essentially.
Yeah, and gain Israeli citizenship. And, the funny thing is, like I was reading, and this is from, I was doing some reading earlier. Even from the Jerusalem times of Israel, and there's a quote here that I would like to read that I think is very telling, where it says that I think this was from, it was either the Jerusalem Post or the Times of Israel. I think it was the Jerusalem Post. It says, critics call the law racist and say it is an attempt by Israel to keep the number of Arab citizens down rather than to prevent terrorism, as it nominally claims to do.
Right. So one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
Wait. No, it gets better. Proponents of the law. Proponents largely agree with this claim, but justify their position by saying that without the law, tens of thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of Palestinians could submit requests to become Israeli citizens every year, threatening to upend the Jewish majority of the country.
So
they're admitting
there are a few things. Yeah. So before they used to say, "Oh, it's a security issue. We don't want
terrorists are sneaking in by
we don't
getting
want
married,
terrorist organizations we don't want terrorist organizations to send their members into Israel to become citizens through marriage, and thereby creating a security concern or a security issue."
Yeah. So they're like, terrorists are getting fake marriages so that they can sneak in and then blow things up.
Now they're coming out in the open, just admitting that no,
it's a demographic issue.
This is about again, going back to the Jewishness of Israel. We're talking about, all
Yeah,
right,
it's about
well, we'll
maintaining a demographic majority.
maintaining a Jewish majority in
Mhm.
Israel, right? And doing anything that needs to be done to prevent that majority from going away, from the
Which
Palestinians becoming a majority. And so here,
which
so
should
for
also
people who
be
don't know, Palestinians, you typically have larger families. They have more children than Israelis do. And so, it's only a matter of time before this is going to happen anyways, which makes this whole issue such, like, the way that the Israeli government
yeah.
is approaching this issue, this whole divide between them and the Palestinians in such a ridiculous way, because they think that just by like creating barriers and separating the West Bank and Gaza from Israel, that the problem goes away. But it doesn't, because the
Mhm.
Palestinians are still having more and more and more children, and with time they're going to be the majority. And so that is going to go against everything that they're talking about. And then when they say, oh well, we're just going to want a two-state solution, so we can get into that a little more.
Well, the
But the
Tuesday
two-state
that
solution,
like let's put that off for a minute. Like, I think that's the two-state versus one-state solution. We'll have to get into that. I mean, that's a big issue. But I
yeah,
would
we can
say
talk
that
about it like later, but yeah.
yeah. But I just want to say, like, this should be very familiar to Americans when you see white Americans being very scared about Mexicans and Hondurans, Central American and South American migrants coming to the US and being terrified of their presence because it's going to make the white people a minority.
Let's build a
And
wall.
let's build a wall. This is Trumpism. This is like, where did Trump get the idea? Where did he even get the inspiration for this? Israel was building a wall and built a wall long before Trump was shouting about this shit.
I mean,
And the point
with
is,
Trump, though, it was like, it was, most of it was rhetoric. There wasn't actually going to be a wall built across the whole southern border, except
yeah,
Israel did build an
Israel
entire
actually
wall.
did build a serious wall
That's how
between the
like
West Bank and
fundamentally
along,
racist that government is.
yeah. But I mean, first of all, like, I don't like that kind of racial thinking about how a country should be constructed. And if you say you are a secular democracy, then it really shouldn't matter which color people are there. And sure, we need to, every country wants to, like, have some sort of process to deal with immigrants, and every government wants to keep track of people. However, if it's based on, race, where you set your limitations, that is problematic, and I do not care for that.
That's
And
apartheid.
yeah, uh-huh.
That's
Wait,
apartheid.
what did you say? Wait, what was that? What was that word? Yeah,
We gotta
yeah,
get we said the A word. We gotta use the A word.
the
Go
A
into
word.
it.
No, I mean, when you have, and this is the thing, is
Ooh,
Israel
okay.
Israel builds a wall, okay? You build a wall and you say, we don't want you coming over here. We built a wall. Okay. However, they keep coming on the other side of the wall and building settlements. So Palestinians can't get over, are blocked from getting into Israel, but Israelis keep coming into the West Bank and building new settlements. So you have a wall to keep them out, and then you open the floodgates to let, your ultra conservative radical settlement makers come in and set fire to Palestinian olive groves and orange tree, whatever, and build a settlement and kick people out of their homes, and so that it's a one-way highway, and then they build roads and barriers and things to protect these people,
that only
the
Jews can
settlers.
use.
There's like, this is a Jew only road, only Jews can use this
That
road.
I'm sure that Americans will also be familiar with the white only signs,
Yeah,
right? Back in
yeah,
the
Americans should be familiar with it.
50s, right?
And I
Like
mean,
the
I think
restaurants.
if there's something that should be Jew only, it should be gefilte fish.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really cares
Because
for
that's
the
just
gefilte
a
fish.
little bit gnarly to try to eat, but you can have that as Jew only. But like, come on, like, we all need to use the roads.
Right, and it's also like another big issue is the access to water. That's a huge issue.
Oh, it's a whole water.
Basically in an area with very little water, the Palestinians who, I mean, most of them, I'm not going to say most, but a lot of them have, like, depend on agriculture, need water, and not only for their livelihood but to survive. But yeah, the Jews, who, like the Jewish settlers, they get all the water they want, and they have the swimming pools, and they have it, like, it's just ridiculous. My
And
cat's
I would say also, like, I'd like to throw in just for, oh, hello, meow meow.
she'll make an appearance every now and then. Yeah.
What's the cat's name?
So Luli, this was Luli. Last week was
Really?
Antar showed up last week. He might show up
They
later.
like to make appearances.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Give their feline opinion.
They're anti-Zionists, by the way.
But when it comes to water access, and here's another, like, the myth about this is something, something that really pisses me off. Here's something that really pisses me off. There's a myth that everything in the Middle East and North Africa is just like a barren sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not.
Well, it's a very diverse region, like geographically.
Yeah, there's a lot of different, like, geographical types of, ecologies going on, that people are just like, oh, it's just the sands and caves. Durga, they're in the sands and the caves. And it's like, Palestine, is famous for its oranges and orange groves and olive trees. Like to just have this idea that it's just like this barren wasteland. Like, there are parts of the areas, parts of the region that are barren wastelands, and there are parts that are very lush and have plants.
Yeah, I don't need
grow
to go very far
flowers and
from
trees.
where we live. We live in LA. We don't need to go very far to reach some wastelands out
Yeah,
here,
I mean, Los Angeles is a wasteland, and it doesn't have its own water either.
Right. That's the other thing. But yeah,
I mean, Palestine and Israel have probably better water than Southern California.
mm-hmm.
They probably have better water resources. The question is, who owns the water? But I mean, like, Los Angeles is piping in water from Nevada and wherever. Anyone who's seen the movie Chinatown has some idea of this.
Yeah,
So,
but the issues. So I mean, we could get, there's so many details one can get into when it comes to, like, the differences between how Jews are treated and how Palestinians are treated. Basically, it's that Palestinians get the second class treatment, if not worse,
well,
even.
Yes,
Not
but
like,
also,
so like
I mean,
if you're a Palestinian, like citizen of Israel, then yeah, you're getting second class treatment. But if you're like resident of Jerusalem or the West Bank or Gaza, you're getting like just shit on.
well, if you're in, here's the thing: if you're in East Jerusalem or the West Bank or Gaza, these are militarily occupied territories. Okay, and I learned international law actually from Israeli scholars. But according to the Geneva Convention, which, this goes back to like right after World War I, the Geneva Convention specifically says if you occupy a territory with your military, you are not allowed to change the demographics. You're not allowed to move in and colonize. You hold that territory until a peace agreement is arrived upon, and then you trade the territory back to whoever is considered the sovereign ruler of that territory. That is the Geneva Convention. That is what every nation in the world, besides the United States and Israel, sort of agrees on. It's international law. This is international law. So you can't, you know what I mean? Like, you can't say that you are a like the forefront of democracy and Western values if you can't abide by international law.
So one aspect of the excuse me, one aspect of that is something that came up a lot in the rhetoric, which is very factual actually. In the latest round of attacks that happened against Gaza, the Israelis bombed the hell out of Gaza.
Yeah,
like 250 plus people died, like
it was something
60
like that,
plus
253 or something like that.
60 plus kids.
Yeah.
Anyways, the issue is that one of the lines that the Zionists will use is, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. And
Sure.
here's the thing, when that's the line that is being used by every media organization, most if not all, like that's the qualifying statement before they can open their mouths and say a single word about this or utter a single phrase about Israel. That is the first thing they will say. Israel has the right to defend itself. Well,
yeah, but
going back to what Hussein was saying, right, is that international law, right, the Geneva Convention, which the whole world agreed on ages ago, right?
it was about it was over 100 years ago, essentially.
Right. One of the things about military occupation is that you cannot use, as an occupying force, you cannot use violence against an occupied people, even if that occupying people use some kind of violence against you.
You can police them,
You
according
can
to
police them, but you
you
cannot
can
use
police them, but you have to abide by laws of like the police, not by like
the fifth strongest military in the
destroying
world.
destroying their
Right.
fucking, like you're like Dresden.
Yeah,
just
and so
firebombing the whole place.
For the people who aren't aware of the disparity, the power disparity, right?
It's
So
huge.
it's massive. You're talking about people who mostly are unarmed or use rocks against tanks.
Yeah, they're using like they put some like incendiary thing attached to a balloon and send it over to start a fire.
Right.
Like that's their biggest technology, is a balloon. They're
No, but
fighting
even
with balloons against like, one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. And when you have one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world, you have a responsibility to use it with restraint. And
yeah,
that's
and
just
the thing
no-brainer.
that, yeah, it is a no-brainer. And the thing is, yes, Hamas does have rockets. They do have rockets, but guess what? You know, these are one, very poorly made, one, and they're not accurate. And
Which makes, I mean, yeah, I mean, like, I will admit that Hamas firing rockets indiscriminately is in itself a war crime also.
it
However,
is a problem.
the Iron Dome system of knocking them out of the sky is pretty effective. And the
Yeah.
amount of Israeli damage that comes out of Hamas rocket fire is pretty small. And I'm not saying Hamas is good. I'm not supporting Hamas as a political movement, but you have to look at, like, when you are, it's kind of like, it's like, why men aren't supposed to hit women? Because women, I'm taking this in another direction now. Women can be crazy. Women can be bad and abusive. However, your average woman
This is getting interesting.
biologically, your average woman biologically is smaller and has less upper body strength than your average man. So when you're a man and you have the advantage, you don't hit women. Like, if a guy steps to you, like, I'll punch you in the face, but like, like, I'll fight a guy if I have to, but not that I like to, but I will if I have to. But I don't, I'm not gonna hit a woman. I've been hit by women. Had women punch me. The point is, I mean, like, when you realize there is a difference in strength here, you should be cognizant of the difference.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
like,
not only does Israel get, was it $3.8 billion in military aid from the US every single year, but they've grown their own, like, homegrown, like, weapons
yeah, they
industry.
have a huge tech industry,
Yeah,
and
they have, like, they make their
they
own
share
drones.
information and technology with the US.
They make their own, like, their
Yeah, and
own
then
guns. They
they
have their
like
own
surveillance.
drones that fly.
No, and surveillance technology and that type of stuff, and they sell it back to the US too. So it's a mutually
And many other
beneficial.
countries, like,
Yeah,
their weapons industry is massive.
yeah.
So
Well, they also were, who they were good friends with, was apartheid South Africa.
yeah,
It
I
says
mean,
something.
where did like, I think I was reading about this the other day, that Ariel Sharon, former prime minister of Israel, who was the defense, this I'm telling the story when he was defense minister,
Yeah,
right? So he was equivalent
yeah.
of, like, the secretary of defense.
This is also the guy who presided over the Sabra and Shatila massacres,
Yeah,
which is
in
a
Lebanon.
story that maybe, like, we don't need to get into right now, but
Right,
it's
but
pretty awful.
yeah, so he, the story was told by a former Israeli ambassador to South Africa, and
Mm.
that he was on a trip in the 80s, during the 80s, with Ariel Sharon to South Africa. And the one thing that, like, that blew Ariel Sharon's mind is, like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this is what we have to learn and implement back in Israel, was, guess what?
Apartheid.
was it the Bandustan, what they call them,
Bantu?
the Bantu, is that what they call them, the basically the how the South African
The
regime
townships?
is, that's what they call them, yeah, I think. Can't remember the name, but there was a similar. Wait, I'll look it up. But
I'm sure there are different names for it, but you're talking
yeah,
about like the black townships.
Bantustans, yeah, also known as
Yeah.
Bantu homelands, Black state. So these were, yeah, territories set aside for Black inhabitants of South Africa. So as part of its policy of the state's policy of apartheid. So
Mhm.
the townships, right? So that's where they got the idea from. These guys were really, really close, like the South African, like South
They were
Africa.
into it. They're like, hey, fellow racist,
Yeah, and
tell me what you got.
The Israeli government will do that with any country that is into that.
Well,
They're all about it.
it says something about their governing mentality when they say that the Palestinians are worse than the Nazis.
Yeah, I mean,
It says something about how they look at the world.
so here's the other thing is that when if we were talking about, the issue, if we're going to talk about Nazis, is ethnic cleansing, right? And right now what we're seeing, and we have been seeing for decades, is the Israeli government pushing for the takeover of more and more Palestinian land without ever reaching a Palestine, like a peace deal. And so using the settlers to go in, take up more and more and more land, building more and more and more settlements until the Palestinians get fed up and either leave or are killed off or what have you. And so eventually it will be a completely dominated land dominated completely by Israeli Jews and ethnic cleansing, apartheid.
Which brings us to the thing that was the impetus for Hamas firing rockets is what's going on in Jerusalem. So there's a neighborhood in Jerusalem that they're trying to demolish and replace the Palestinian residents with Israeli Jews. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So
talking about Sheikh Jarrah.
Sheikh Jarrah, yeah. So this is this neighborhood is a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. So after the 1967 war, there was an agreement, according to like international
No, actually,
law.
it was 1953. It was before that. It was in 1953.
Where they agreed to decide like to give the East Jerusalem as capital to the Palestinians. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, no, that neighborhood, specifically that neighborhood.
Oh, that
specifically was that neighborhood was there were a lot of displaced Palestinians, and Jordan, the country Jordan, was in control of East Jerusalem. And in 1953, they made this agreement that they would displace Palestinians from other towns if they were willing to give up their refugee status, which means they don't have a claim to return to their original homes.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were willing to give up the refugee status and not claim the right to return to their homes, they could settle in this neighborhood. That's what this neighborhood was. And that was brokered between Jordan and Israel.
So really, really quickly, 1948 was the Nakba, when Israeli or Jewish Zionist, rather, Israeli Zionist gangs, and which eventually formed the Israeli military, uh, expelled millions of, was it 750,000 Palestinians from their homes across historic Palestine, right? And these people
Yeah.
are now
A lot
refugees
of them
all over
went
the
to
world.
Jordan.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A lot
A
of
lot
them
of
went to
them went to
Jordan,
Lebanon.
neighboring countries, but then many others spread around the world, and now they number in the
Yeah.
millions, right? And
And
so they,
generally they maintain their status as refugees, because the point is they're saying I will always be a refugee until they carry like the key to their former house around their neck.
that was probably given to them by
And those
like a
houses, a lot of
grandfather
those
or great
houses still
grandfather.
exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those
So
houses still exist, and they're now occupied by, some Israeli family lives there.
so
And so they carry,
imagine.
like, it's a symbol, it's a national symbol, is the key to the
Mhm.
houses that they were chased out of during the war.
So
And
imagine you're
the
a
right of
Palestinian.
return is the major.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
go for it.
It's a major. Go on. This is important.
No, I mean it's a major symbol of Palestinian identity. It's sort of, we were chased from our homes. Like, you read in the literature, in the history, it's like a lot of the people, that means they weren't all fighting. There were civilians, and
There
war
were
was happening,
most
and they
people were
left their
civilians.
homes to seek shelter. They were mostly civilians, and they went to, like, we're gonna, like, leave the city while it's in the middle of a firefight. And
Many of those
you
villages
know
were actually destroyed, by the way.
yeah, some were completely destroyed, some weren't. And there were acts of, war crimes on both sides, but let's say one side had a little bit of an advantage.
Yeah,
The point is, they all these civilians thought that they would be able to come back to their homes, and they still
yeah,
had the keys to their houses.
and they
And
still do.
instead, yeah, they carry them around, they wear them around their necks, and it's a symbol of we will someday return to our land
It's a
and
symbol
our
of
houses.
resistance. Yeah,
And
and yeah.
in their houses, like, the same houses are occupied now, they're lived in by Israelis that came from Poland,
Brooklyn, yeah, like wherever,
like
look,
Russia, whatever. You know what I mean?
you could
You
be
know,
born and raised
as
in
long as you can prove
Brooklyn.
you're Jewish.
As long as you can prove you're Jewish, you can become an Israeli citizen and have rights to that land, whereas the
You know,
native population has no rights.
funny, funny
Like,
side, funny side story. Funny side story.
mhm.
I know a guy who has a Jewish grandparent. He's not really practicing Jewish for much. Like, he'll, like, maybe, like, celebrate Hanukkah every once in a while for fun, but he's a very American guy, and doesn't care that much about the religion.
He'll go to like a Jewish deli every now and then or something.
Yeah, every once
Kind
in
of
a while, but
thing.
he's really not that much into it. He's a real California guy,
Okay.
very California guy. He went on Birthright, which is a free trip that Israel offers to anyone who can prove Jewishness. They get a free trip to Israel and a tour around all the stuff. And they were at the Wailing Wall. And there was another guy who actually was a devoutly religious Jew. But according to Jewish law, if your mother isn't Jewish, then you don't quite count as a real Jew. So California guy was allowed to go visit the Wailing Wall, and they didn't let the other guy in. because
Wait,
they're like, you're not a
the
real
religious Jew, the
Yeah,
religious
the
guy,
religious one. They didn't allow him
really?
because yeah, he wasn't Jewish enough.
Like they didn't
Even
allow
though
him
he
into
believed
like
it, he actually was
at the
like
Wailing Wall.
practicing Jewish. And California dude who was hanging 10, he was just wanted an excuse to travel. And the one guy that actually it would have meant something to him religiously and spiritually, they didn't let him in because genetically they didn't find him Jewish enough.
Wow. Yeah, man. I mean,
And even California guy felt bad about it.
Felt bad.
It didn't stop him from going in there, but like, or didn't make him like make a protest out of it. But he was like, yeah, I kind of felt bad because I really don't, not really that.
Well,
Jewish.
interesting thing. A lot of like younger American Jews are sort of are voicing their opposition to the birthright trips, as well as their concerns let's just put it lightly, concerns with Zionism, right?
I think enthusiasm for Zionism has really declined in the U.S.
Yeah,
In the last like 7 years or something, because when I was in college, it was
let's
a
get
real
back to
battle.
this. Let's get back to this. Let's finish the talk about Sheikh Jarrah, and we'll get back to this because it'll lead perfectly into this. So so imagine that you're a Palestinian family living in, let's say, Haifa, right? 1948 happens, and you're expelled from your home, and instead of fleeing to a neighboring country, you end up being told, hey, you will give you this home in East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood that we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
And in exchange for you dropping your refugee status and basically
giving up the right to return.
Giving up the right to return, right? Okay, so like that whole neighborhood full of people who are Palestinian, who were expelled from their homes, and from the late 40s to early 50s, and then so fast forward till today, right? So they've had there've been multiple
generations. They've been living there since 1953,
right? And
or longer,
right? And so they've been there. I mean,
so it's generations.
Yeah, so generations of Palestinians have been living there, and then now the Israeli government and the settler organizations want to take over all of East Jerusalem, and they don't want to leave anything to the Palestinians, even those homes that were given to the displaced people like decades ago. So this is where the most recent issue started, in that the settlers were going in and literally just barging into people's homes, kicking them out onto the street and saying, these aren't your homes anymore. Like that's literally what's been happening. And
that's not an exaggeration. That is not an exaggeration. It is a historical
like you
fact.
could look up videos on YouTube and see this for yourself.
And we could provide the bibliography, from
we could share. I
can provide you a bibliography purely from Israeli authors. Because actually, I had more Israeli professors than I had Arab professors, honestly.
Yeah, and so with what happened with Sheikh Jarrah is that this was during Ramadan, right? So this was
which is
couple
also,
months ago.
For everyone's information, the most holy month.
It's the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, right? And
so not all Palestinians are Muslim,
right?
There are a lot of them are.
A lot of them are. There's a sizable Christian minority, but anyways, I'm saying this because when the whole issue of Sheikh Jarrah was happening and the families were being threatened with being displaced again, the Israeli police went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the last 10 nights of Ramadan. So this is like the holiest time of the holiest month in the Islamic calendar. And so you had thousands of
One of the
Palestinians.
most holy places.
It's the third holiest site in Islam, the Aqsa Mosque, right? Which is located right by the Wailing Wall, right? So in East Jerusalem. And so you have thousands of Palestinians worshiping there. And so the Israeli police just barge in and start firing skunk water, which is like sewage water, at people and desecrating this holy site, right? And then not only that, but firing stun grenades and rubber bullets at people who are there worshiping peacefully, right?
Yeah,
and so
for the purpose of letting some like extremist Jewish militants to like take a tour of it.
Right. And so this is like what Israel does, like the Israeli government does. They'll instigate things like this. They'll pick a fight. Every year during Ramadan, there is clashes. The Israeli police are sent in to start clashes in the Al-Aqsa Mosque specifically.
What started the second Intifada? The second Intifada was Ariel Sharon going to Al-Aqsa just to be an asshole. It's like, you don't need to go. Like, there's no reason for Ariel Sharon to go to Al-Aqsa except for to piss people off.
So it was only then that Hamas said, listen, Israel is desecrating the third holiest site in Islam. And in addition to all the stuff that had been happening in Sheikh Jarrah, right? They said, listen, if you continue, we're going to fire rockets. And that's exactly what Israel wanted. Right. And so
they wanted them to do that. It was a deliberate instigation. So then they can say, oh, we're defending ourselves.
We're defending. And so here's the interesting thing. For people who don't know, when you watch the news about this, about what happened and what like typically happens every single cycle of this, like this occurrence.
It happens every 4 years.
Yeah, sometimes even like shorter time spans than that. But
maybe that.
But what you'll see happening is that on the news, in the media, the clock starts ticking when Hamas fires a rocket. That's when everything is framed. That's they frame it in a way to make it seem as if the issue began with Hamas.
Yeah, the story started when Hamas fired a rocket. It's like, really, that was the beginning of the story?
And that's why the Israelis will be, and the people who defend the Israelis and defend the Zionists, be like, oh, but Hamas fired rockets. But Hamas, I'm not saying that Hamas firing rockets is a good thing. I'm not defending that, but that is not even
strategically very successful.
But that is not how it started.
But the point is, like, no, but also the point is, they're not, like, when you target, like, Israel has they have the military capability. You know, I remember during the first Gulf War, where when the American military was, I think it was, it was first the first Bush.
Yeah, HW.
Who said HW Bush was saying, oh, we got the technology, we can read the tags on their shirts, we can target them precisely. Which I'm not saying is wrong. I think they do. I don't think he was like, they have very good technology for targeting. Now, if you're going to brag about your targeting technology, then you don't get to have a pass when you kill a bunch of civilians and you bomb a wedding that had nothing to do with terrorism or opposition or anything. So, that's what bothers me, is that the Israelis, they're like, oh, we have a right to defend ourselves. Okay. And then they blow up a news building.
Or the
And
only,
they hit it multiple times. They knew exactly what was going on. It was the Associated Press.
they hit
Like,
the
this is an
only,
international news organization.
they
It
hit
wasn't
the only, they hit
it
the
wasn't like
only,
Hamas national news. It was the Associated Press.
they hit the only lab in Gaza that is testing for COVID.
Yes.
In one of the
Yes.
most densely populated places on earth.
Yes. And you're telling me you have such great technology. They have technology. They can knock rockets out of the sky before they hit ground. They can, target individuals and send a drone in and bomb them. And it's like, you have the technology.
Yeah, I don't
You
know
have
if you saw
spies.
did you see the pictures and the videos of the Iron Dome, of like
Yeah,
how the rockets
I've
were.
seen.
So like if let's say Hamas is shooting a rocket, the rocket goes like straight into
Yeah.
the sky, right?
Yeah, they have
The
a
rockets,
rocket. They
yeah,
have
they go
like an
like round.
interception rocket.
They go like they're heat seeking, and so they go
Yeah.
round and round and round, and then they target the rocket. It's like
Yeah, but the
the
point, yeah.
technology
So
is
the point
so
is, I mean,
advanced.
if you have that level of technology, you have no excuse when there are civilian casualties. And I mean, I am not even saying, I'm not even saying that it's off limits to target Hamas officials or Hamas, military personnel.
And they can.
Okay.
That's the interesting thing. They can target Hamas officials if they
And they,
wanted to, because here's the thing. Israel has one of the most advanced intelligence services in the world. The Mossad have agents everywhere. And so some of the most secretive regimes in the Middle East, like let's say in Syria, for example,
yeah.
we heard like a few years back that there was a very high level Hezbollah leader and operative who was assassinated in Damascus. And that is, there is no way that could have been done by anyone but the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence services. So the equivalent
Sure.
of the
But
Israeli CIA, right?
the
And so
point,
if they wanted to,
yeah.
target Hamas officials and target, like, let's say military, let's like use that in quotes, military targets, right? They could. They're
Yes,
they're more
they
than
can.
capable of doing
They're
that.
more than capable of very targeted strikes. And so the point is,
Even assassination attempts.
yeah, no, I mean they assassin. It's pretty. There's a lot of evidence that they assassinated Yasser Arafat
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
with some kind of radioactive poison. That's not just a conspiracy theory. They probably poisoned him. Yasser Arafat was probably poisoned by the Mossad. The point is, they have the ability to kill people in very targeted, limited ways. So when you blow up an entire building that houses the Associated Press or houses civilians, you didn't have to do that. This is excessive force.
Mm-hmm.
It's excessive force, and it's group punishment. And it's not, this is not, it's not legal by international law. And it's just human cruelty. You're
So
displacing people, civilians. You're
to give an
displacing
idea,
civilians.
of what, like, on a human level, what this is. So, uh, for the people who don't know, of the blockade against Gaza, there's a land, air, sea blockade. Like nothing
Mm.
goes in, nothing goes out, right? Israel controls the land borders, the airspace, and the
And the
the
sea.
water and the sea, right?
Yeah.
And so it's poverty rates are insanely high. Unemployment is super high. It's very densely packed place. It's just an open air prison is how it's described. But
Yeah.
every time that Israel goes in and bombs the hell out of Gaza, and then they have to rebuild. And so sometimes they'll get aid from other Arab countries, humanitarian aid to help with the reconstruction. Sometimes even that doesn't get through, like the materials to reconstruct. They have to
Yeah,
recycle
it's
the
not
rubble.
easy to get
Right,
materials to build when
right.
you're under a blockade like that.
So when you're under a blockade and you live in a highly, like very highly densely populated area, the only way that you can build for space is to build up, right?
Mm.
You need to build these towers. And so that's what happened in Gaza. You have these towers so that people, because it's such a tiny strip of land, there's
Yeah.
nowhere to go, right? And the population is just growing and growing and growing. And so one guy was a Palestinian guy from Gaza was saying how the bombing of these towers was so like detrimental to their spirit, right? Because isn't just that these towers were like office buildings or apartment buildings, but that every kind of, let's say, cultural center, every kind of language center, every kind of entertainment like place that people could go to like forget about the daily like hell that is the occupation that they live under, or if they want to
Mm.
like learn a new language so that they could better themselves or learn a new skill, those centers were always in these towers. And so when they bomb the towers, all of that gets wiped away, right? All the organizations, the aid
Yeah. And
organizations were
it's
housed there,
not
all the media
it's not an
organizations were housed
accident.
there. It's not an accident, right? And
It's not
so
it's deliberate cultural genocide. It's like,
right,
let's destroy your culture. Let's destroy your ability to advance yourselves, and to like, let's
any kind
like
of
just
civil
make
culture is
generations
just
of people.
eliminated.
Which the irony of that is what you're creating is generations of people that want nothing but revenge against you,
Yeah, that is
and they're
what
gonna
breeds
come for you.
radicalization.
Yeah,
That is
you're making
exactly what does it.
radicals. You're making people that like you like did not allow me to have a life. There is no way for me to have a real normal life and just have a career and do something and write a book or teach a class. And like, you keep destroying the ability for people to have a life. What do they have?
And this is the other
The
thing
will
that
to fight. The will to fight is what they have, and that's what they're going to use.
this is the other thing that people really need to understand is that and this we were talking about this last episode in when it came to Islamophobia, but it relates not just to Muslims but to people of Middle Eastern, North African descent, people of Arab backgrounds, of non-Arab backgrounds from that region, Muslims, Christians,
Mm,
different
sure.
religious groups. But this that there is a concerted effort, and this has gone on for centuries in the West, to paint people of that region as like somehow subhuman or not human even, right? And so what I'm getting at with this is that, these are normal people just like you. They just want to live normal lives. They just want to raise their kids, to send their kids to school, to be able to like live
It's
a
like
normal, decent
it's
life,
like
right?
it's like when Ben Affleck was on the Bill Maher show and he was like, "Oh, these Muslims, they just want to like eat a sandwich."
Yeah, Yeah, but see,
That's
that's the
how he
thing. The
that's how
media,
he phrased it. It's like
the
they just want
only
to eat a sandwich and live a normal life.
the only thing that people in the West are fed when it comes to the media is that these people are terrorists. These people are scum. They are backwards. They are undeserving
Desert
of
rats, they
being
live in deserts
being
and
deemed as
caves.
human. Yeah, and so therefore, who cares if you bomb the hell out of them and wipe them out? No one cares, right?
Yeah, they're just a bunch of cat desert like cave rats.
So here's the interesting thing that happened this time. I mean, we both grew up like learning about and hearing about the Palestinian
Uh-huh.
issue, right? And so this is not new to us. I'm 36 years old. I mean, I've learned about this ever since I was a child,
Yeah.
right? And so um, the thing is, though, that this time around, because a lot of the coverage and the narratives weren't being set in the mainstream media, but rather social media, that more and more people have started to become aware of what's actually happening. And so what's interesting is that public opinion is shifting. It's changing. We can get into like I promised we'd get back to the issue of
That's a whole
young American Jews,
yeah,
and
that's a
so
whole conversation there too.
yeah, but like the public opinion aspect, especially in the US, is huge. It's huge. And the
Oh, it's
fact that
so I mean,
more and more people going against Israel, going against Zionism, it's like it, this is what is going to change
no, I mean some of the,
the issue.
the things there are things that people tell me people, like non-Arab like just some like you know woke young people say things to me that it's like if I said those things when I was in college I would have been like run out of the room and called an anti-Semite and blackballed and so yes the general concepts the general like social uh, attitude towards these things are definitely changing and I
Yeah,
do have like as much as people talk shit about millennials um I actually have some optimism about these younger generations. I think they're smart. I think they have morals and emotions in the right place. Um, I think they should read more books, but
yeah.
you know what I mean. Like I think it's our responsibility as being a little bit older than them to guide them a little bit. Give them bibliographies,
Here's
give
the
them
thing. I think
resources.
that it's an interesting time, generally speaking, historically speaking, in that you have this convalescing of so many different like issues just boiling up and boiling over really. And whether I mean and I think the turning point was that during COVID, uh, the murder of George Floyd, that that was a huge turning point for
Mm,
Black Lives Matter movement, of course. But then that allowed that gave a lot of space for a lot of other movements to have their voices heard. And so this is in that context, the Palestinian issue was given
well,
more
man,
bandwidth to be
it's
heard.
it's like I mean, it's one of those things with most of these issues. It's like the same with Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too. It's like eh, you had to have been an idiot to not know these problems existed. You had to have either been an idiot or you were part of it.
You know what? But I think that what's telling is that, some might say that this is just human nature, that like to delay dealing with a problem until it blows up in your face. But I don't think it's human nature, because I think that you see historically you've had different in different periods of history, you've had different um, ruling entities who dealt with problems in a very different fashion. But I think that what we're seeing a lot of the similar trends, not just here, but like all over the world, is how white supremacy deals with problems. And that
Yeah.
the delay of dealing with, let's say, um, like wages not keeping up with the cost of living, or the issue of, black people being killed by the police unrelentlessly, or the issue of the prison industrial complex, or
I
the
think
issue of
I think
wars, or the issue of
well,
immigration.
you can go on and on with
Yeah,
some
yeah,
issues.
it's
The
it,
point is, I think
but there's a
that
pattern.
there's a no. Well, the pattern is, um, I think the pattern is basically, if we keep you, if we keep most of the people entertained most of the time, or we give them aspirations that they think they can reach, they're not going to say much.
So let's
And
yeah, go ahead.
so it keeps them relatively, they just keep trucking on. It's like, well, one day I'll get there. And some of them do, and most of them don't. But it's like, feed the aspirations. Someday you could be, a rock star, or you could just go to Disneyland and have fun. And here's some other like entertaining things, and here's Netflix, and
Watch some football.
watch the football, get really angry at the enemy team, and
Hmm.
channel your anger there. Don't look at the man behind the curtain,
Hmm.
and keep doing that. Throw out all kinds of like other people to be mad at, and keep that going. And I think people are starting to come out of that coma.
Well, I think that enough people have gotten screwed over,
Yeah.
especially
What
particularly
doesn't make
the
sense?
millennial generation. They're like,
Yeah.
nothing that has been said and sold to us, or attempted to be sold to us, has worked. Nothing. It's
No,
like
and it
we're
doesn't,
all in
it
debt.
just
We're all
doesn't
in debt.
logically make sense.
We're all in debt. We can't afford to buy homes. We can't afford to settle down. We can't afford to do anything, right?
Mm,
And so it's like, all right, well, it's gotten to the boiling point. And to go to sort of turn back to the Palestine issue,
mhm.
um, to demonstrate how it's very similar. So in the early '90s, you had the Oslo peace accords, right? You could like explain this better than I can, but the idea was that, the U.S. Sponsored these talks between Israel and the Palestinians, with the goal of a two-state solution, of a peace deal with two states, one for Israel, one for Palestine. Well, Israel already existed as a state, but that there would be a
Right.
Palestinian
Yeah.
state, and that would be a peace deal, right? And so this was the early '90s, and so
Yeah, but like, this is like 1992, like 1991, 92. Oslo
yeah.
was bullshit. Oslo was total bullshit, because at the same time as they were negotiating, they were like, settlement building was ramping up in the West Bank.
So you'd think that there would be some goodwill and say,
It
oh,
was,
okay, we're gonna
yeah, it
stop
was.
and not take more of your land that's supposed
It's
to be a
like
part of
if
your
you should put
future
a
state.
freeze on that until we make, like, if you're saying you're making a goodwill negotiation, like you should maybe put a freeze on all of these illegal, I repeat, illegal settlements that the
Illegal according
whole,
to international law.
according to international law, not according to my dumbass face, it's according to international law that it's illegal to build these settlements in the first place, any of them.
Because
And
that land is
according to,
supposed to be used for a Palestinian state.
yes, because occupied, military occupied territory is supposed to be held basically as is until a peace agreement is come to. And the Oslo Accords were supposed to be that peace agreement. The problem was you had tons of settlements that had been built, and that is changing the demographic layout of the territories that you are occupying,
So
which is
that didn't
illegal.
stop. That
It is
continued
illegal
since the
by
early 90s.
international law.
So since the early 90s, that continued till this day.
It ramped up during the Oslo negotiations. They actually accelerated, like they were trying to like build as much as they could before the Oslo Accords were signed.
Right. But even after they were signed, they were like they tested the waters and they were like, all right, no, let's build a settlement here, see what happens, build a settlement there.
I
And then
mean,
they
the
just went.
Oslo Accords went because also they never offered East Jerusalem, which has always been a Palestinian demand, which is East Jerusalem as a capital for Palestinian state. If you want a two-state solution, I mean, it's very, the minimal demands are return to the 1967 border, East Jerusalem as a capital of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, and have some kind of maybe, connection between the two territories. And, right of return is also a prominent demand, although that one is going to be pretty difficult to figure out, because when we're talking about right of return, are we talking about the descendants of people that lived in these houses and these villages? And I mean, these villages, a lot of these villages don't even exist anymore, and they've turned into parks. And so like there's a lot of Palestinian demands that can't really feasibly be met, but there's a minimum that
Right.
has never been offered in any of the negotiations. And Israelis love to always say, like, we've offered peace so many times and the Palestinians have rejected it. They've
So
never.
what's essentially happened is that since the Oslo Accords, right, Israel has just kicked the can down the road and never actually gone through with a peace deal. And so what's
They've
ended
never
up happening,
offered.
right?
They never offered the bare minimum of what the
right.
Palestinians are asking.
And so what's ended up happening over the years, which was Israel's objective all along, was that more and more Palestinian land was taken over during that time for Israeli settlements, thereby displacing more Palestinians. And so, going back to my original point, what's similar for a lot of the Palestinians to what let's say Black people are dealing with, or what young millennials are dealing with in terms of like economic situation, is that they're fed up. They were sold a bunch of lies for a long time, and it's like they've that's it. They've reached the edge of the cliff. That's it. There's no more that can be done in terms of like accepting the status quo.
Yeah, I think it's
So
quite simple.
so that's where we're at right now, and
Yeah.
it's a dangerous situation over there, but that's why I think that a lot of people all over the world are in solidarity, because with the Palestinians, because they can see that, you know, these patterns are playing out everywhere, right?
Yeah, this is
They may
nothing
they may
new.
differ, they may differ in some ways, but of course, but the substance is similar. And so I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of a one state solution, which is what a lot of people have been saying, is that, okay, we're not going to get a two-state solution because, you know,
Well, they made it
even
impossible.
they made it impossible. Even if hypothetically you wanted to do it, right? It's like, well, demographically it wouldn't work, right?
They'd have to like do a huge population transfer,
Yeah, and so
which,
and so,
is not, it's like you have to uproot people from their homes and move them to a different place and replace them with other people.
right.
And population
So
transfers, I am not a fan of. It's very much ethnic cleansing.
yeah, and so the other thing, so the other scenario is a one state solution whereby, all right, you get rid of this apartheid regime, you get rid of all, like what happened in South Africa. They ended that system.
Yeah, you have truth and
And
reconciliation.
right,
I mean,
and
South
and
Africa, you got to hand it to the South African black people that they didn't, you know, have a mass like murder of white people.
right, and that's the thing, is that, like,
Like they didn't.
if there is uh, a genuine effort to find a solution, because here's another really important point that I feel like we need to make clear, which is that we don't believe that Jews should be expelled from that land or from that area, right? It's like we see, all right, just as in like South Africa, what happened was that,
Mm.
all right, this is what the current situation is. You have two populations who need to be able to live next to each other, and live together. And so the idea is, all right, do away with the current system, have one state where everyone is an equal citizen. How complicated is that, right? Um,
It's not that hard.
and no.
Like
And
I
so
mean,
it,
the differences and the differences between Israelis and Palestinians in terms of like how they, you know, how they run their families, how they
culturally
eat.
they're so similar.
They're it's really a lot closer than like white Americans and black Americans,
Oh
honestly.
yeah.
You
Oh
know what I
yeah.
mean? Like it's just it's a contrived animosity that doesn't need to exist, because I mean, Israelis have fully like immersed themselves into, even the ones that come from Russia, they're not eating Russian food, they're eating falafel.
Right. They're
You
eating
know,
hummus and falafel and couscous.
they're eating falafel, and you know what I mean, like, even the differences between the languages. And I got into an argument once between with an Israeli guy at some like mixer that was about like language learners mixer, and I was like, learning some Hebrew, and I started talking to this Israeli guy, and I was like, like, when I hear it, it sounds very, it sounds foreign, but if I read it, it's like so many cognates. I was like, I mean, like salam, shalom, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's so like there are so many cognates. Like I can figure out what a lot of things mean in Hebrew just because they're cognates for Arabic words. It's, I mean, like they're cousins.
Yeah.
They're totally
I
cousins.
mean,
It's like
that's the funny thing is that when you
linguistically, in terms of culinary
Like
habits, in terms of
Arabs,
like traditions and family
Arabs will
values.
see, Arabs will say to each other, like when they see like, let's say a group of Jews walking by, they're like, oh, the cousins have arrived. Like
Mm,
they'll say that, like that's an expression, right? They'll
yeah.
call Jewish people cousins. They're like, the Jewish people don't know that they're being called cousins. Like just the Arabs amongst each other in Arabic will
What's
say,
up,
"Oh, look,
cuz?
the cousins are here," right? And it's not derogatory in any way. It's like,
I mean, it's it's very visible and it's easy to see if you're willing to see it. But
yeah,
the catch is like that Israeli guy that I was talking to when I was telling him like, oh my god, it's such cousins, like the like Arabic and Hebrew, like we draw our letters differently and we pronounce them slightly differently, but it's like really all, I mean, like it's like Spanish and Portuguese, like it's a
mhm.
very close language. And he was like, he got really offended. He was really offended. He was like, no, I don't hear that, I don't see that, what are you talking about? No.
So that's when the nationalism kicks in, and it's
Yeah,
like,
that's when the nationalist like propaganda bullshit kicks in, and he's like, no, 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 it's not similar at all. Hebrew is unique, nothing is like it. And it's like, what the, come on, bro. Like when you extend a branch, an olive
olive
branch,
branch.
and you're acknowledging your similarities, which are, anybody else looking at Arabs and Jews can barely figure out the difference, really.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like you people with your beards and your falafels and your like, you know,
And
like
your angry
and your
grandmas
and
and
your sounds, your sounds, the ha and the ra and the sounds that we can't pronounce. Like you're all the fucking same to us.
yeah,
So it's like, come on, guys. And it's not
yeah,
as though
yeah.
like a number of Jews went to, have gone to Arab countries and Islamic countries during their persecutions, like all the Jews that went to Istanbul during the you know uh, Spanish Inquisition,
Yeah,
or
Muslims have taken like, yeah, have
or
taken
the
in.
Jews that went to Morocco during the Holocaust.
Mhm, mhm.
That was a thing. Like
Yeah,
Jews were going to like Arab countries during every time Europeans tried to kill them all.
yeah. So the thing is, it's when you take away the nationalistic propaganda and narratives that were sold to people, right? And you like if you go back before the founding of Israel, how many Jews lived in Arab countries? They were Arab Jews. That's the thing. Like
Yeah, they
even just
spoke
the
Arabic.
how the labels like worked is like, oh, like they're an Arab Jew. I challenge anyone to go into Israel and find any Jewish people who would classify themselves as Arab Jews, right? Like there may be some, but it's
Well, they
there's
were like in the 1970s. There was a
yeah,
group of like Moroccan Jews that formed a party that was inspired by the American Black Panther Party,
right.
and they
But
called
my
themselves Black Panthers.
my point is that there are so many people who were sold on the idea that no, you cannot be Arab and Jewish. That's just that's
Well,
unacceptable. That doesn't fit
Arab itself
into
is,
it doesn't
it's
fit
a
into
vague term.
it's not it doesn't fit into that
It doesn't fit into
Zionist
the narrative.
nationalist narrative, right? And
It doesn't
so
fit the narrative.
a lot of people who were like Jews from Iraq or from Yemen or from Morocco, from Egypt,
Or
from Syria
Ethiopia.
were denied their culture. They're no different. Like a Syrian Jew is no different than me. I am a Syrian, right? They would
Well,
be no different,
not only
except
were they denying their culture, they were denied a lot of freedoms, and also there were like medical experiments done on them. And
right,
that's
right.
a whole other conversation that it
Yeah,
probably
yeah, and
is too much
treated
because we've
like,
already gone on
yeah,
pretty long here. But
it's a long
there,
one,
I
yeah.
mean, there was some Tuskegee type of shit going on with like black Jews and Arab Jews in Israel.
My point is that so much of this bullshit, this nonsense, can be like doesn't have to be there, right? So
It
much
doesn't
of it, so much of it can be wiped away,
most
and Jews and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs could get along so well, and they do. So when you look at the Jews who are not Zionists, who don't believe in the Zionist project, they are like they could not be any closer to Palestinians and Arabs. Like we get along so well. Like
I mean, the
it's one of those
differences
things.
are tiny. It's like
It's
slightly different
sad. It's
holidays,
sad.
basically.
It's really sad, honestly. And
I mean,
and
it really is Isaac and Ishmael.
yeah, yeah.
It really
But
is Isaac and Ishmael.
and when I think honestly, yes, we could talk about like even European Jews or Jews from other areas, but I'm talking like specifically even more related to our part of the world, Middle Eastern Jews,
Mm.
North African Jews. I mean, it pains me when I think of the loss of Syrian Jews, that like Syria had to lose that part of its population, right? Same with
No,
the Iraqis, right?
It's the
And the
same with
Egyptians.
Egypt. Like Egypt used to have
Such a huge loss.
Jews, used to have Greek Christians, used to have such a lot of Italians even. Like,
Hmm.
like Egypt used to be so much more cosmopolitan, and it's become so, you know, monolithic in its identity. And it's sad because you can watch old movies. Like there's a hilarious comedy, black and white, from like the 1950s or something, called Hassan, Marcos, and Cohen.
Mm,
And it's about these three old geezers who are, it's like, what I mean, three grumpy old men, like
yeah,
one of those
yeah.
movies. Like, what is, I don't remember the name of the, like, grumpy old men movie that
I can't
Hollywood came out
remember.
with. But it's the same idea. It's like three grumpy old men. One is a Jew, one is a Muslim, one is a Christian.
Yeah,
Hassan, Marcos, and Cohen. And it was
yeah.
like, it was hilarious. And that's how it was, and you had, there was a lot of cosmopolitan feeling. And, it wasn't until like the 80s and 90s that it started to really, well, I mean, I guess maybe this started in the 70s. But I mean, there was a lot of propaganda from Israel to bring Jews from Arab countries to Israel.
Hmm.
And you
It's
had
a huge loss.
the Levon affair,
Yeah,
which I don't know. I mean, we've been going on for a while. I don't know.
yeah. Let's not get into it. Like
Get into the
we're
Levon
trying to
affair,
wrap it
but
up,
one of
but
these days we'll talk about that, because that was a very interesting event.
yeah, if we could
Um,
like do an episode maybe about like history of like like modern history of like Arabs and Jews pre pre 1948. It would be interesting.
or pre 1967, or even during that time. Like there was a lot of goings on
Yeah,
that
yeah,
throughout the
that'd be interesting.
50s. It wasn't just, it didn't end in 1948. It was throughout the 50s and 60s. But
Yeah.
I do feel like, you know we perhaps have uh reached our a decent ending point.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
it was a good conversation, and I think we just wanted to give our thoughts, but also like about the issue, and share some of that with people who might not know as much about what's going on. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, I think we could easily go for 8 hours, but I don't think anyone needs that. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. All right, well,
we're trying to make this, easily digestible.
before I forget, so that
Yeah,
we I didn't do this we didn't do this at the end of the first episode, but like the video, share it with your friends, and yeah, subscribe, please. That would help us.
yeah,
Um,
we're just getting started. So we're building our audience and building um, a brand kind of
yeah, and
thing.
share some of your thoughts in the
Oh,
comments if you have.
comment,
Yeah.
yell at us, get mad at us, give us like send us angry messages. Well,
Yeah, we'd love
I'll
to.
read them and respond. Get mad at us, and I'll send you a response, and I'll
Yeah,
try not
yeah,
to be too mad back.
yeah. No, no, we welcome that. So
We're open to all kind of comments and you know uh, interest in what we're doing.
yeah. All right, guys. Well, till next time. Do another episode next week, hopefully. And
Well,
yeah, Khalidiyya out.
I think that's all, folks.
That's it.